News of President Trump's diagnosis spread quickly around the world. Many people woke up to the headline that America's leader has contracted the coronavirus. Foreign leaders have been sending President Trump well wishes. To talk more about how people around the world are reacting to this news, we have CBS News foreign correspondent Charlie D'Agata in London. Charlie, great to have you with us. So what kinds of messages are people around the world sending to President Trump?
Well, Tanya, by and large, the response has been overly positive. Among the global reactions here in the UK, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson wished the President and the First Lady best wishes for a speedy recovery. As you pointed out, he is a COVID survivor himself and suffered very badly from the infection before recovering. Russian President Vladimir Putin sent a direct message to the President. This is released by the Kremlin, saying, "I hope your inherent vitality, good spirits, and optimism help you cope with this dangerous virus." And the director of the World Health Organization started his briefing today, wishing well for the couple, saying, "Our prayers are with them." We'll remember, it wasn't that long ago, President Trump had fallen out with the WHO over the handling of the COVID crisis. So by and large, positive reactions and reinforcement from the international community, from the President and the First Lady.
And of course, as we mentioned earlier, President Trump is not the first world leader to contract the coronavirus, and he's not the only leader to play it down. Boris Johnson and Bolsonaro also dismissed the virus early on. How did they fare with the disease, respectively, and how did it change their views on the pandemic, if at all?
Yeah, well, you know, it was interesting seeing Boris Johnson speak just then. I was here when he fell ill, and he was downplaying the seriousness of COVID from the beginning. And arguably the most important global figures who have tested positive for COVID were Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. But it gives some insight as to how this can affect two people differently, two countries differently. Bolsonaro had a mild case, and in the past it even dismissed COVID as a little flu. It was a much different case entirely for Boris Johnson, who now readily admits that it was hard to believe that in just a few days his health had deteriorated so badly to the extent where hospital staff and his own staff were working out contingency plans if he were to succumb to the virus. Again, he said he had mild symptoms in the early days. It was his staff that sent him to the hospital, and he said very quickly he spent more than a week in intensive care. For a while, it was thought he might even have to be put on a ventilator. He even told President Trump afterward it was touch and go for some time. He admitted that being overweight did not help. In fact, he kind of launched a sort of campaign here in the UK, especially for older people, to lose weight in order to better their chances should they catch COVID. And when he tested positive, we have to point this out. Yes, he's overweight, but he's also 19 years younger than President Trump.
And so, Charlie, how did that then influence his outlook on the virus publicly?
Well, it's an interesting question, Tanya, because, of course, publicly, being a victim himself and being profoundly affected by COVID, he was ready to go out there and start pushing for stronger rules, like everybody wearing a mask, social distancing, calling off the schools for some time. So he went at it. But if you look at whether or not the British public was supporting Boris Johnson before he fell ill or whether they were supporting him more afterward, not necessarily. It sort of coincided with the seriousness of it. We have to remember that Boris Johnson fell ill a number of months ago when the graph was on the up. And as soon as they put the restrictions in place, like the masks, like closing down schools, essentially a national lockdown of a kind that the United States hasn't seen nationally. It was much stricter here for a certain number of weeks. The public was already behind that. So, yes, of course, they were sympathetic with this figure who had had a profound effect from COVID himself, a very personal effect. I mean, he had a baby at the time over that course of time as well. So, yes, there were a lot more people supporting him on a personal level, but politically they were already behind him because they were witnessing for themselves, not just the prime minister, but their friends, their family, their loved ones were also coming down with COVID.
So interesting. Well, Charlie D'Agata, thank you so much for that international perspective.